All right, here we go. This is one of the most important topics that there is in our fat metabolism section and body composition change section. And the topic is rapid versus slow weight loss strategies and gain strategies. So, a number of sports require athletes to gain a great deal of mass to be successful, including basketball, see LeBron James, bodybuilding, Lawrence Bellinger, baseball, and of course football. So athletes are constantly having to change weight depending on what part of the season they're in or if they're in the off season or not. One question I think that athletes who are dependent on their body weights being higher, they're always asking, how do I get this jacked, right? How is that humanly possible? Well, we'll talk about that in a second here with the traditional model. And the traditional model is called a classic bulking model. The classic bulking model happens where we take in an excessive amount of calories to create a quote-unquote general anabolic environment that's conducive to gaining muscle. So this is Lee Priest, who was famous for this. This is him in the off-season. He would get extremely fat in the off-season, and then here's after. Can you believe the change? And the thought is that if by adding excess calories, it's going to be anabolic, you're going to gain mass. Yes, you're also going to gain fat, but you can cut that off during the cutting cycle. Problem is that the majority of overfeeding studies, actually all of them, until recently, have been done in sedentary people. Now, Claude Bouchard is the king of overfeeding. And he conducted a study on overfeeding that involved 12 pairs of identical sedentary males. Okay, basically, so you have 24 subjects. They were overfed 1,000 calories 6 days a week for 100 days. The average nutrient content of the subject's food intake was 50% carbs, 35% fat, 15% protein. Here's what happened. Their muscle mass went up about almost 2 kilograms, but their fat mass went up 6 kilograms. So this is showing that overfeeding by itself is anabolic. But it's anabolic to both muscle mass and fat mass. And by these data, the indication is that it's more anabolic to fat mass. Now the problem is, if you put on that little bit of muscle and that much fat, by the time you lose fat, and we know caloric deficit can be a catabolic stimulus, would you lose all that muscle? Problem is we have no studies in resistance training. No studies. Until recently. Okay? One thing that we know is that a very common way to bulk is to incorporate weight gainers into the diet. So here's the top weight gainer on bodybuilding.com. One serving is 1,250 calories, 250 grams of carbs, very little fat, only 5 grams, and 50 grams of protein. It's recommended to have 2 servings of this daily. So here we see, basically, we're looking at fat oxidation. Okay, you look at days 0 through 14, and fat oxidation declines. Okay, in the 50% carbohydrate overfeed group, fat oxidation declines. So, and that's the graph on the left, on the lower left there, right? So, what these weight gainers are telling people is that, oh, it's super low fat, so you're not going to gain fat. However, if you stop metabolizing and oxidizing fat, then all the fat you consume in your diet is going to be stored. Okay? So that's important to understand. So how many carbs do we need? Well, if we go back to our carbohydrate lectures, we know resistance training depletes muscle glycogen by about 25 to 40 millimolars, while 3 to 5 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram increases muscle glycogen by 10 to 40 millimolars per day. So that is likely more than enough carbohydrates for a typical training split. Unless you're training heavy legs, hypertrophy legs every single day, that's not what most people are doing. Even if you train every body part 3 times a week, then this is going to be beneficial, 3 to 5 grams per kilogram. One of the questions people ask is, are carbs anabolic? What I want you to do is look here at the group on the left. This is a study by Staples in 2011. They're looking at muscle protein synthesis in a non-exercise and then exercise group. Immediately post-exercise, they consumed either protein or protein plus 50 grams of carbs. Notice that protein synthesis was not different between the protein and the protein plus carb group. If you look at protein breakdown went up in both the protein plus carb group with no differences between conditions. This study by Glenn in 2010 looked at proteolysis, and they compared 30 grams of carbs versus 90. Notice that both groups decreased protein breakdown to the same extent. So a bunch of extra carbohydrates past their role as substrate is likely not going to be anabolic to anything but fat tissue. So enter our laboratory. Sean McCleary in our lab actually headed this study up. And what we did was we evaluated 2 different calorie intakes in an attempt to gain fat mass and muscle mass. Or actually just in general gain mass. So additional calories were given from a moderate calorie and carbohydrate containing supplement versus a formulated weight gainer. We had 16 recreationally trained subjects. They trained every body part twice a week. They consumed either a moderate or high-calorie weight gain diet using moderate versus high-calorie meal replacements for protein intake. So we synthesized the weight gainer, and then we used Pursuit RX whey protein and recovery blend for the other group. And you can see here, the high-calorie group ended up having 2,280 extra calories a day, 435 extra carbs. But the moderate group only had 825 extra calories a day with only 83 extra carbs. Protein and fats were no different. And that's the total calorie intake, about 2,800 versus 4,461. Again, no difference in protein intake. We looked at fat-free mass, fat mass, and total mass on our DEXA. We looked at performance on the squat and bench, Wingate peak power, and vertical jump power. One thing I want to point out is that Wingate power, what that is, you're on a cycle ergometer, you sprint all out, and an external load drops, and you push against that external load. However, so that is more of an absolute power measure, whereas vertical jump, you're moving your own body weight, so that's a relative measure of power. Sprinting is a relative measure of power because you're moving your own body weight. So again, this is the difference between external power and internal or relative power. So if you look at total mass, look at the delta change. The moderate group put on about 2 kilograms, and the high group put on about 4 kilograms of lean mass. Total mass. So they gained double the mass as a moderate group. However, if you look at fat-free mass or lean body mass, both the moderate and high group gained the same amount of lean mass. Same amount. However, what do you think happened to fat mass? Well, fat mass went down by about 1.5 kilograms in the moderate group, and it went up by over 1 kilogram in the high group. So basically, the moderate group lost fat and gained muscle at the same time, and the high group gained muscle and gained fat at the same time. Now, you'll hear a lot of people on internet forums say, oh, it's not possible to gain muscle and lose fat all at the same time. Well, clearly here it is possible, and it happens all the time. Dr. Rob Wildman actually did made a really good body composition index. He called it the Desirable Body Composition Index. And basically what that is change in fat-free mass subtract change in fat mass. You notice that the change in fat-free mass minus fat mass was way greater in the moderate than the high group. What about performance measures? Well, basically what I want you to see here is this. This is the delta change in the moderate group for external, which is the wind gait, and the body mass exercise, which is the vertical jump. Both went up. However, if you look at the high group, only their external power went up, which is the wind gait, but their relative power didn't change and visually slightly went down. This is very important for athletes who require high relative strength. So if you're a running back and you have to sprint, you may not want to gain weight too fast because it's going to slow your sprinting time. Okay, especially if you're prepping for a combine. Same thing with the vertical jump, which we see in this study. So this suggests that for relative strength or relative power, you got to be careful with how fast you gain weight. Strength gains, both the moderate and high group gain the same amount of strength. The same amount of strength in both the squat and the bench. So from that we conclude for quality gains in mass, without collateral damage of fat mass, individuals should opt for moderate increases in calories and weight per week. Also, our study lasted 45 days, whereas Claude Bouchard's studies lasted 100 days. It could also be possible that the length of the quote-unquote bulk should be limited. All right, second half of this lecture is on fat loss. What about the last time we talked about the rate of weight gain? What about the rate of fat loss? Does it have an impact? Well, oftentimes we have individuals attempt to decrease fat mass during the off season. So a real good study by Garth looked at the effects of rapid versus slow weight loss on lean mass, fat mass, and performance in elite Norwegian athletes. So you had one group that lost 0.7 kilograms of body weight a week. The other group lost 1.4 kilograms of body weight a week. But at the end of the study, they both lost the same amount. It just took the fast group half the time to lose that weight. You see that by the end of the study, both lost the same amount of weight. But if you look at fat mass, the open square group, the open bars, is the slow group. The black bar is the fast group. Notice that the open group lost more fat. Also, the lean body mass tended to go up in the slow group and tended to go down in the fast group. And if we look at change in one arm bench press, pull, squat, 40-meter sprint, counter movement jump, the majority of those favor the open bar, the white open bar, which is the slow group. So they gained made better performance gains when they slowly lost weight as opposed to rapidly lost weight. However, this tracked the slow and the fast group after 12 months, and both groups regained their weight. So what this is saying is that regardless of the fat loss method, if not monitored, individuals will gain back the weight the same after 12 months. So athletes need to maintain a lifestyle conducive to their body mass goals. So what determines whether we hang on to lean mass or not? One of the things that determines it is the amount of body fat that you actually have. So Forbes has a theory, and he suggests that the more body fat you have, the more rapid you can lose fat without losing as much muscle. So what you have here is this. Okay? Change in fat-free mass is on the vertical axis. So that's how much fat-free mass these subjects lost in these studies. Okay? Then on the horizontal axis, you have the amount of starting body fat that the subjects had. So the further to the right, the more body fat they had. The further up the vertical axis, the more fat that they actually, muscle they actually lost. Okay, so again, what I want you, this is basically looking at fat mass. Okay, what I want you to see here is this. Individuals who had a low amount, then you have up top right, you see black, which is 0 to 450 calories a day deficit. X is 500,000 calorie a day deficit. And the open bar, or the open circle, is greater than 1,000 calories a day deficit. So you notice when you had very low body fat to start, and you had an extreme fat loss protocol, which is greater than 1,000, you lost the most lean mass. Right? However, when you had the more body fat, you could literally lower your calories by 1,000 and not lose even half the amount of lean mass as you did when you were super lean. So what this indicates is that the leaner we are, the more conservative we have to be with our weight loss, because we're in a more catabolic state. Your body's going to preferentially, at that point, the leaner you are, the more preferentially it chooses muscle as its preferred substrate to oxidize or catabolize. Take-home message, the leaner you get, the greater the preference is for losing weight via muscle. This strategically results in lower metabolic rate, which is an adaptation to protect your body from calorie deficits. Okay, so one of the things is it may take 4 to 6 months to recover from extreme calorie restriction. So what you're looking here is baseline calories, then they had a dieting period, and they looked at what happened 30 days after extreme dieting, and then 30 days where they reestablished their old weight. Notice their metabolic rate was still lower than it was at baseline. So again, it may take 4 to 6 months to recover your metabolic rate. So what happens in an extreme dieting scenario like bodybuilding, for example? Well, this is a study by Dr. Chris Foss and Lindy Ross, and they did a case study on Chris Foss and his prep for a professional bodybuilding natural contest. So at the beginning, he was 14.8% body fat. He got down to 4.8% body fat. And at the end, post-contest, he was back up to 14.6%. This is a 12-month case study. It's 6 months of dieting and 6 months of recovery. So here's what I want you to notice, okay? Again, you have minus 6 to 0. That's when dieting started to the contest. And then 0 to 6, that's 6 months of recovery. So I want you to notice here, all right, that's testosterone. Testosterone plummets. Okay, it goes down by like 70, 80%. All right? And it takes 3 months for that to recover. Now, if you look here at cortisol, cortisol skyrockets, and it takes 3 months to recover. Right here is ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hunger hormone. The higher it is, the hungrier you are. It goes up over the 6 months' time. It didn't go back down to about 3 months of refeeding. So you're going to be hungry for a while after you diet. And of course, Everything else next to testosterone right there, those are T3 and T4 and leptin. Those hormones regulate your metabolism. Notice they're depressed and they don't rise back up till 3 months. What you're looking at here on this graph, the black is body mass. Notice it goes down from minus 26 weeks to contest time. The body mass. Energy intake is obviously decreased during this time period, but then it's reintroduced during the recovery period. And then what you're seeing with the little dots, the dotted line is energy expenditure. Energy expenditure decreases, essentially, and doesn't start to recover until after a few months. So basically, we have body mass going down, but energy expenditure is suppressed with dieting. Okay, and the combination of that plus increased energy intake can lead to fat gain. So a lot of times bodybuilders, they come off a contest and they say to themselves, oh, I'm super anabolic right now. You know, I've been dieting for a long time, so my body's going to want to put on muscle super fast. So I need to take advantage of this time period. Well, turns out that your body actually preferentially wants to lose or wants to gain fat mass and not gain muscle. So look here, change in fat mass from minus 6 months to 0, it went down. Notice it was almost fully recovered by 3 months and was fully recovered by 6 months. Muscle mass, on the other hand, went down, stayed down, and by 6 months had not recovered. So your body does not preferentially want to put on muscle after a contest. You're going to have to recover your metabolism, and if you eat a bunch of extra calories during that time, they're going to preferentially go to fat. Take-home messages: it appears that the body strategized to preferentially gain fat after dieting and to have a slower regain of muscle tissue. So athletes may need to slow weight regain. Natural bodybuilders who bulk immediately following dieting are in danger of negatively altering their body composition.